Well, welcome to headquarters.
Dude, this place is amazing.
Yeah. How long was your trip here?
It was actually a quick trip. So flight out of Oklahoma City was at like 11, flew to Denver, and then Denver to here, no delays. And so it was pretty easy trip.
I just saw an article that Tom from Eagles and Angels sent me this morning about Family Month, and it was like a position for a state to teach all the values that families are more important than anything else, and so they dedicated a month to it, and that was Oklahoma. Oklahoma did that.
Yeah, Governor Stitt, he's just been very, very open about his conservatism and the stuff that he's doing. So like on the pro-life issue, on that issue and that type of thing, and just hearing like the hate a guy like that gets for doing something, it's like, how are you complaining about family values? Like what exactly is your complaint? Now,
Yeah.
I don't like the idea that the state is handing down values of any kind.
Yeah.
But the fact that the state is even like thinking about that kind of a thing, it's just like, this is a good thing, people. Like, this is a good thing. Like, again, you don't want state mandated morals, but
Yeah, they're recognizing the importance of it.
well, and it's at the same time, it's like, is the opposite true? So like you see a lot of this in the Christian sphere, like these people that want to do the Benedict option where they have like no connection to like culture. They don't fight the culture wars, like don't get into politics. I was like, okay, so you only want atheists controlling politics and culture? So because that's what you're saying, like don't get into the culture war, like don't fight the abortion issue, don't fight any of these like hot button issues. It's like, well, no matter what position you take, it's going to end up being political because that's how our world is right now. It's like, what exactly is the plan then?
Yeah.
And so I'm very critical of Christians that are just like, be known for what you're for, not what you're against. It's like, well, when you communicate that you're for something, you automatically communicate that you're against other things than that.
Yeah.
So it's like your slogan doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, take a position.
Right. When it's like, you hear people that are like trying to be third way people, like, oh, we're going to take the third way approach. I was like, okay, let's pick one of the most incendiary topics possible. Transgenderism, like transgenderism inside for kids and stuff like that. It's like, what is the third way position on that? There's, hey, we shouldn't allow our kids to do any of these types of things, take the hormones, get the surgeries. And then there's the other side, which is like, yeah, do it. Like, this is exactly what they need. Where's the middle ground on that? Okay, we're only going to cut off one part of their body a year. Okay, we're only going to let them take this much testosterone. It's like, there is no third way position. It's just this fanciful idea that looks good on a t-shirt. Like, again, it's all sloganeering.
Yeah. I have major concerns like you in talking about this, about the future of our country because of the lack of integrity in men and family values. Just it seems like we've gone down a slippery slope. We've kind of lost it. And there's pockets, I would say, of resistance of people just doing the right thing, and that's really good. But a lot of people, especially when you look on social media, and it doesn't take long to discover how many men are lost. And I know I kind of wanted to focus our efforts in the conversation on that because I look at you and Andy Frisella and Greg Anderson and Joe Rogan as people who are positioning their content and their communication about kind of improving that perspective. And whether it's giving perspective, giving experience, or giving context, it's like people can connect the dots and you're by proxy becoming a mentor to a lot of men who need the mentorship. And it's definitely a dilemma. What have you seen? I mean, your faith, I would consider you faith-based, right?
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about that first. Like, what is your deal? Like, what is it that you do, and then where does that come from?
Yeah. So the short version of the story is, I didn't grow up going to church, but if you live in Oklahoma and you were born in Oklahoma, you're a Christian by dint of birth. Is kind of how people think about it. And so, you vote Republican, you listen to country music, and you probably get to go to heaven. Like, that's kind of the idea. And so I started going to church on my own when I was in junior high because that's where all the cute girls went on Wednesday night, like that kind of thing. But then as a 10th grader, this guest preacher came in, hellfire and brimstone, like, oh, there's volcanoes and earthquakes and everything's increasing. And I'm like, hell sounds terrible. And so in that moment, depending on your theological leaning, that's either when Jesus, snatched me up or that's when I chose him, that type of thing. And so just like to put yourself in this perspective, go back to when you were 15, right? Because I'm 15 years old and I'm a Christian now. Okay, well, what does that mean? So I'm like trying to figure out what that means. I'm reading the Bible. I'm like going to Christian bookstores and I'm like trying to find context, right? So at the same time, I'm trying to become a Christian or trying to figure out what that means as like living that out. I'm also trying to figure out what it means to be a man because I'm 15, right? My parents are divorced. I don't live with my dad. And so it's like, you're kind of in that weird spot, right? And so the conclusion I came to was, all right, all the godly men are inside the church doing God stuff, right? Praying and giving you limp handshakes and, tucking in, their shirt to their khakis. And then all the manly men are outside the church doing man stuff, right? Outdoorsy
like security
stuff.
in the park.
Right. Yeah, like that, dude, that type, the same thing we talked about when you came on my show, when you talked about you wanted to hit like a cowboy, do like a cowboy church type of thing. And so I carried that dichotomy into my 20s. And until I started really digging into the gospel accounts of the life of Jesus for myself, I was like, wait a minute. Like Jesus seems like a super rough, gruff, like intimidating Middle Eastern Jewish construction worker, right? He's not like how he's depicted in all these pieces of art and things like that, where he's kind of like looks like a Danish model with like soft features. It's like, what are you talking?
Flowers.
Who is this guy?
Good
it's
skin.
Like, well, like look at it. Just look at the one story of him clearing the temple. So he walks into the temple. And he sees money changers and people that are, created his father's house as a place of business. And what the scripture tells us is that he leaves, goes and makes a whip of cords and comes back. So he didn't have a whip of cords on his hip, right? He wasn't carrying. He goes and makes a whip, comes back, and clears out the temple. Now, this is where people lose the thread on that story. It was premeditated righteous aggression because he knew what he was going to do whenever he was making the cord, right? But it was an inherently violent act as well. Because people are like, oh yeah, he just cleared out the pigeons and sheep and all that. It's like, no. He cleared out the pigeons, the sheep, and the people that were selling them and the money changers. And with the number of people that would have been at the temple, like how intimidating did this guy's violent aggression have to be for no one to try to stop him? We see nothing in the account that shows that anybody tried to stop him. Like imagine, teaching one of your classes, right? Maybe Fieldcraft's a bad example, but imagine teaching one of your classes and somebody coming in with a whip and clearing the room out. Like what kind of look would they have to have in their eye to be like, all right, player, like we're not gonna do this. And so that's when I started to be like, wait a minute. Dudes that are more wired like you, so guys that come from the military or LEO or fighters or construction work, these rougher guys, they walk into churches and they're like, if this is what it means to be a Christian, like singing these homoerotic songs in a key that I can't hit and wearing these types of clothes and talking the way these people talk, and it seems super inauthentic. And like you see, like I was talking with one of your guys out front, it's like you're surrounded by people that you don't think have ever done anything hard. They have no calluses on their hands, like their faces look normal, no crooked noses, no cauliflower. And it's like, I was terrified that people were going to miss out on who Jesus was because his followers are so soft. So that's where Undaunted.Life came in. And so it started with a devotional that I wrote for the YouVersion Bible app. And it's like, okay, we're going to focus on the Lion of Judah because Jesus is Lamb of God, which everybody talks about all the time, but he's also Lion of Judah, which nobody talks about because he's too scary. But as we see in Revelation, Jesus comes back with a sword in his mouth, with his robe dipped in blood and a tattoo on his leg. Like he's not carrying around a lamb, kissing women on the tips of their noses, saying, oh, you look so cute in your tunic or whatever. And so it's like, I set out, we're here to equip men to push back darkness. That's what Undaunted.Life is. And we do that by creating content that provides spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. And so guys like you, guys like Chad Robichaux, guys like Bert Soren, guys like all the people that you mentioned, there are people that are doing that just kind of as an everyday lifestyle. But this is just the overtly Christian like version of that, I guess you could say. So a little bit longer answer, but that basically gives you an idea why we do what we do.
No, that's perfect. And you've seen through your interactions with men what they're lacking, what the absence in our culture is. And I think when I had framed it yesterday for Prepared, I focused on three, I'd say, virtues. One of them is a lack of purpose, relationships, a lack of relationships, and a lack of faith. And let's take it from your perspective. What are you identifying with these men that you interact with through your observation? What are we missing? What are men missing?
So let's start with the guys that are completely uninitiated. The guys that would never come to Fieldcraft for any classes. They would never step into a jiu-jitsu gym. They wouldn't step into a gym at all. These are men that have bought into the cultural lie that a strong man is a dangerous man. in a dangerous and in a negative sense. Like that this is a strong man. The reason why we have wars and rumors of wars and the reason why we have all these problems in culture is because strong men are terrible, right? We're toxic, that type of thing. And everyone's heard the poem by now, hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times. And those people have basically walked into that poem with their eyes, covered and their ears plugged because they don't understand how these good times have created all these weak, soft men. But then there's the other side of it, Mike, to where it's like, okay, you've got the men that are all about the preparedness stuff, right? Right. So the EDC, the fanny pack, like, the carrying the classes and all that stuff. And their truck looks like a damn transformer and like all that stuff is great. And like,
you just described me.
Right. Exactly. Right. So I just described you and the people that we know and understand. But some of those guys go to the opposite extreme to where it's like, okay, this is what it means to be a man. It's camo and it's camouflage and it's cauliflower ears and it's aggressive and it's beer and it's whiskey and it's jerky and it's all that kind of stuff. Those things are not inherently bad, but if those are the focus of who you are as a man, you're missing the thread.
100%.
And so imagine preparing for the worst.
Hey guys, Mike Glover, Wolf 21. I want to talk to you guys today about our mission statement, which is to provide natural supplementation and improve your health and well-being. Everything from CBD and CBN in combo to get a good night's rest to Ruck Up for first responders who can't have anything with THC in it. We're always trying to innovate to provide natural supplementation, and that's our mission. We want to do what nobody else is doing and provide a full spectrum of options from Wolf 21. So go check it out. The link's down below, and I appreciate your business and appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
A solar flare blows out all the electronics, government takeover, and, it's kind of like, well, what'd you say prepared? It's like having a, tricked out Ford Raptor with no gas in it.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a great camper now, like wherever it is.
Yep.
But imagine being so prepared with supplies and water and chickens and all that kind of stuff, but then you haven't figured out who Christ is to you. And so it's like, to a degree, you might have just been, gathering a bunch of materials that some other chimp is going to take from you, right? Or if you die, there's going to be a group of chimps that are going to take all that stuff that you've brought together. So a lot of guys will focus on everything running up to the time when their ticket is punched and, clocks up, but then they give no reckoning to what it means after that. And so I feel like I have, a unique placement from God to where it's like, okay, I wasn't military. I didn't grow up hunting, fishing, doing any of that type of stuff, fighting. This is all stuff I'm learning in my 30s so that my 3-year-old and 1-year-old sons don't have to learn it. They're just going to be around a dad that does that. But I'm also going to be catering to them spiritually to let them know, like, hey, a double leg takedown is something you need to know how to do. Like being able to pull a pistol from the appendix position and get it onto target, like safely and quickly, something you need to know how to do. But if you haven't reckoned with who Jesus of Nazareth is, an actual historical figure, like if you haven't reckoned with him, like you've missed it. You've missed it somewhere along the way. And so I feel like, you mentioned a guy like Frisella or Joe Rogan. One of my best friends is Joby Martin. He's a pastor out of Florida. And he found my show because he was trying to find a substitute for him and his senior in high school son to listen to that wasn't Joe Rogan. Because they love Joe Rogan, but then if he gets on a 45-minute diatribe about tripping on mushrooms, it's like, okay, like I'm a Christian pastor. This is my Christian son. Like I don't really know. Some of these episodes are a little bit rough. And so for me, I became his substitute, not substitute for Joe Rogan because they still listen and it's a great show that I still listen to. But he's like, you're doing all that stuff and you're trying to call men to a higher version of themselves without pussifying any of your message, but also you're bringing in the gospel, which is the only message worth fully preaching with a full throat.
Yeah, it's so impactful because usually conversations that deal around improving men don't have a grounded foundation or base.
You got it.
And so to be able to start from that, like when I connect, if you connect faith and purpose, for example, a lot of people who lack purpose, who would maybe put themselves as an atheist on the check mark, they brag that they believe in nothing. And it's like,
right.
I posted recently a comedian talking about it.
Yeah, I saw the same thing.
It's so funny because it's like, it's so true. It's like you're bragging about literally believing in nothing. And so when you take that position, how do you find purpose in life? Because what's the point? like suicide, drug overdoses, cardiovascular disease, all the bad things that men are consumed in, and all the statistics are going up, are mainly because of that lack of purpose and lack of faith. I grew up a Christian, was in and out of many churches, and I mean, from the snakes and the speaking in tongues,
Oh yeah.
all kinds of stuff. My whole family is like that. But they were migrated from Korea, and my grandma was a Buddhist, and she converted to Christianity and converted the whole family. And that solidified, I think, a foundation for us as a family, kind of networking and growing out of that, a good foundation for what we should do in our own lives. I remember the first realization in Sunday Baptist school, realizing, going to hell would be a bad thing, and having morality and doing good things and having integrity and all that stuff, all these values and principles that were being adhered to me as a young man made me better. Where when I was 17 years old and dudes wanted to go and drink and chase women, I was more focused on the task, because I was like, I don't get off on that. That's not how I roll. That's not who I am. And if I didn't have that good Christian background, it wouldn't have worked out for me the way it has. And so, like you said, I think the fascinating thing about you is, you're willing to be vulnerable, but you're willing to say, hey, like, you don't have to grow up in these environments where you grow up a hunter or a fisherman or a fighter. You could be that, because you could make the decision right now in your 40s and your 50s and your 60s to do something about it. And that's what men need to do. If you had to give advice to young men who need to get started because they might be lost or they just need some guidance, what would you tell them? So
I'll kind of extrapolate this out to a larger philosophy, because it goes back to the worldview thing that you talked about with Buddhism. So this is like a comparative religion conversation. So you'll hear people say, hey, I'm spiritual, not religious. And then when you ask them, what does that mean? That's when it starts to kind of unravel and fall apart, because it's vapid. It's a sentence that says nothing. It communicates nothing, because what does it mean to be spiritual without religious? That means they don't like church, right? But they do acknowledge that there's some sort of higher power, but the farthest they would go is kind of like moral therapeutic deism, to where it's like, yeah, there's probably a creator, like, the world didn't come out of a timeless, formless, void of some kind. There had to have been, if there's a big bang, there's probably a big banger, right? Like they probably get there, but then there's nothing they reckon with. But if you're going to look at Buddhism or Islam or Sikhism or any type of, these isms, you have to compare them to, you have to basically say, hey, do they answer the most core questions? So every single worldview has to answer the same 4 questions. I learned this from an old school, Christian apologist back in the day. Origin, meaning, morality, destiny. Every worldview, okay? Including atheism, agnosticism, that type of thing. Origin, where did everything come from? Meaning, why is everything here, including us? Morality, how can we tell the difference between good and evil? Destiny, where do you go when you die? So if you're an atheist, you're like, okay, well, everything came from nothing, right? And I can't prove that using science or any of my 5 senses, but everything came from nothing. Meaning, there is no ultimate meaning. It's nihilism, right? You're just a chimp in your version, and I'm just a chimp in my version, and we both just evolved from chimps that were fish, that were goo, that were stardust, and nothing ultimately matters. Morality has to be relative, because in that world, what are you appealing to when you say, yeah, we shouldn't chop the heads off of babies? Like, what higher moral authority are you appealing to? You can just say that, me as a chimp, I don't like that. But they can just say, well, me as a chimp, I like that. Who's right? And then destiny, they would just say, oh, well, you're just worm food. You're just, subsumed back into the earth. And so this might be a little heady for like a 10-year-old boy to kind of reckon with, but even a 10-year-old, even in their level of wisdom that they have, they can see kind of the emptiness of some of these worldviews. Like postmodernism, like everybody's, what's true for you is not true for me, and I have my truth and you have your truth, and there's no capital T truth. That's a great place to reckon with these types of ideas. And then when you go into the preparedness thing, maybe you have a dad that's not around, dad's a deadbeat, dad's dead, like whatever. You can say, hey, mom, like my school has a wrestling team, and I think, that would help me to be tough, because I wasn't a very tough kid. right? But I've learned to be tough. I've developed that resilience, right? Some kids are just naturally born tough, right? Like they come out of the womb like an old leather boot. Like they're just super tough, right? But some people just have to cultivate it. And it's like, what's wrong with cultivating something that you're not natural at? And so like, I'm not a natural handyman either because I didn't grow up fixing things. I grew up playing sports and doing school, right? So at the age of 30, I basically burn the ships of my athletic life and I say, I'm going to do jujitsu. And I'm going to figure this out where it goes. And here I am 7 years into that. But you learn so many lessons along the way of where you're deficient, where you need to get better, whether physically, mentally, or something like that. And it's just living a life of resilience. Our culture focuses so much on strength. We love the strength competitions and, these feats of strength, these, 501 kilo deadlifts and all that. But at the end of the day, when Hafthor Bjornsson pulled 501 on deadlift, the next day he wasn't the strongest man in the world. You know why? Because his body was beat up and busted up. Someone else in the world, maybe Brian Shaw or Eddie Hall or someone, they're the strongest man in the world now. But Hafthor Bjornsson's a resilient athlete. He's going to, hit the cold plunge and get a massage, and within a few days, he's the strongest man in the world again. So now I guess my generalized advice to any young person or any adult that's maybe not had that discipleship or guidance from another man in their life is focus on resilience, the ability to bounce back. Strength will always wane, and that's fine. So don't focus on strength. Focus literally on the ability to be resilient in the face of anything that's going to come your way.
Good sound advice. There's a lot of things distracting young men from taking that journey, including social media.
Of course.
I would say their cell phone inherently. There's tactics, I tell people, I don't have an addictive personality. I'm boring and mundane like that. I could have a whiskey tonight and not drink for a year.
Yep.
I don't have a lot of cravings in life. So when I see these young men who do potentially have addiction issues, genetics, they've seen it they're predisposed to it. I've realized that being around men, even capable and seemingly intelligent men, when they get on the cell phone, when they get in the social media app that draws their attention, they become addicted to it and it destroys their life. I've seen it happen in real time. The quickest, it's like a couple weeks. I saw a dude destroy his entire marriage, his entire life, his entire profession. And now, he virtue signals that he's happy, but I'm like, I know the truth. And so I see these things happen, and it's not easy for young men nowadays to kind of understand that. Is there any advice you give to men when it comes to social media? Because there is some good in it. I mean, I found you on social media. How do you strike a balance as a young man?
You're bringing up a bunch of stuff that's kind of like bugaboo stuff for me and stuff that I'm in the process of figuring out because I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. But generalized advice, again, every situation is contextual, every family's contextual, but generalized advice, your kids do not need to be on social media. And I could give a care less whether or not all their classmates are.
Yeah.
Because when you give a kid an unlocked smartphone, right, with full access to the internet, most good parents are worried about what they're giving their child access to, which is a big concern. But what I'm more concerned about, Mike, is who am I giving access to my child? And so when you see these hackers or the guy that was on the Sean Ryan show, kind of showing like, oh, he creates this profile as like a, teenage girl in Jersey. And within seconds, he's getting DMs from adults that want to sleep with this supposedly 13-year-old girl, sending dick pics and sending all that kind of stuff. And these parents just get like, they're just in shock. Oh, wait a minute. Like my 16-year-old daughter went across the street from her school to meet some guy that was an adult and I didn't know it. You gave her the phone. You gave her the phone. Yeah. You gave him access to her. And we've seen all this stuff coming out with lawsuits from the different attorneys general of all the different states going against Instagram because we see from internal documents at Meta that they are targeting preteen and younger teen girls and boys with content that will, suck them into the app and opens them up to pedophilic networks. And so it's like, if you're a parent and your kid's like, I don't want to be weird, I want a phone and social media, it's just like, hey, I guess the Thompsons are weird because we're just not going to have that. And there's a time when you kind of bring that in and there's a time when you can lock down some phones. But again, realize your kids can get around that and they can get around filters and all of that. But you can't expect the child to reckon and have the wisdom to put the phone down. You can't. Their brains aren't fully developed until they're in their 20s, but you're their parent. You're not their buddy. And so you can control that. Like my boys, they will never have unlimited access to the internet. They will never have a television in their room. They will never have a PlayStation that hooks up to the internet. If they're going to be on the internet, they're going to be out in the main area of the house where everybody can see what's going on. And also as a parent, I know we're getting off on a bunch of different subjects. Like when your kid is exposed to porn for the first time, which we're seeing now as an elementary school for boys and girls, how you respond to that moment is going to do a lot to mold them in how they view sexuality, because sex was given to humanity as a gift from God to allow us to enjoy the process of procreation and to experience his glory, because he gave us this amazing thing. We don't like, what is the benefit to us as humans to have like very sensitive tips of our wee-wees? You know what I mean? Like what exactly is that benefit? What's the benefit of taste buds, right? These little things, these are gifts, but put in the wrong context, sex becomes immoral, it becomes sinful, it becomes degrading to you as a person. A lot of that starts with exposure to porn. These little kids, they get their scripts from porn. So they think, oh, this girl wants to have her hair pulled. She wants to be smushed down. She wants to be hurt. And then you have ER visits for teenage girls going through the roof with like anal fissures because, you know, they're performing anal sex because they're also looking at porn. And they see girls getting, you know, violently penetrated through their anus. And they're like, oh, this is apparently what I'm supposed to do to please him. And so it's like, you can't keep your kid from all that. You can't keep them sheltered, but you can give them mental abilities to be able to put those things in the right category and come to you when they clicked on the wrong link on YouTube and they honestly, you know, happened upon a porn website. Isn't that such a great feeling when they come to you and say, Dad, this popped up on my phone. Can you help me? That type of thing. So there's a whole lot more we can talk about, but a lot of what we're talking about, Mike, is what dads need to be doing.
Yeah. I mean, the new update on the iPhone, you could literally just touch somebody else's phone and pull their contact information.
Right.
And the fear in that is obviously with teenage anybody, how easy it would be to exploit them. And I also, you know, I've found pornographic material on the YT, and when you literally just surfing through and you're like, what is this? And I've been guilty of handing my kids my phone on YouTube, thinking if I just put in the search chat, kids videos or whatever, that they're going to be fine. And then advertisements are popping up.
Oh my gosh.
And then there's material that I'm like, what is it? Like, how did they get here? And they got there organically through the algorithm. Like they had nothing to do with it. They're just doing the thing and it's populated. It's on purpose. So I'll only give my kids the phone when it's downloaded content from YouTube Kids and it's screened.
Right.
And my kids are 4 and they're hyper intelligent to technology and all the integration. And I told my the mother of my kids, said, there is no alternative for these kids. They are not getting free and open access. They're not going to public school. There's things that I'm putting my foot down. I'm like, I'll go to court. I'll do whatever it takes, because I'm not going to allow them to fail, because I want it easier for me to send them off to school, which is daycare.
Let's talk about the school thing real quick, because I've been very critical and I've gotten a lot of criticism because I say, look, there are 2 viable options right now for educating your child. Vetted private Christian school, emphasis on vetted, because just because you put a cross in the lobby doesn't mean you're a Christian school, and homeschool.
Yeah.
Right? Now, there are probably some charter schools that I would add to that, maybe like an Apogee or, you know, things like that are popping up that kind of have that focus. But Vodi Bakum, one of my favorite pastors of all time, he has this amazing quote. It's like, why do parents expect to send their kids to Roman schools and not get back Romans? And so you have these parents, and again, I want to be very sensitive to some people's situations because of work or money or whatever. Maybe it's hard. You know, Christian school is not really in the offing. They're in a blue state. You don't get school choice, vouchers and all that. I get it. And the way you work and travel, maybe homeschool is not super viable. But the reality is if you are going to have your kids in public school, you can't just be asleep at the wheel. Like, you have to have way more conversations with them about what's happening, but also you have to realize you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So I live in Oklahoma, okay? One of the reddest states. It's like us in Alabama and are in a running gun battle for the most red state possible, right? There's a middle school that is 10 minutes away from my house. I live in Edmond, just north of Oklahoma City. Red city, red everything, right? Substitute English teacher comes in to this middle school, goes up to the board, writes they/them, explains to the middle school English class, hey, everyone, my name is such and such, so-and-so. I'm non-binary. What questions do you have about that? When that person's job is, hey, what page did y'all get to in Lord of the Flies yesterday? Okay, turn to that page and we'll pick up from there. As a parent, like, you're lucky if your kid comes home and says, hey, Dad, something weird happened at school today. What the hell's non-binary? But most kids, when you ask them what happened at school, it's, oh, nothing. What'd you learn today? Oh, same old, right? But there's been a paradigm shift that has been foisted upon that child that cannot be unraveled. Doesn't mean that they're screwed forever, but they're getting a worldview forced down their throat that you haven't been able to reckon with or prepare them for. So whenever I was looking at schools for my children and landed on a particular school, those types of things will literally never happen. But I'm also not going to go brain dead because kids are going to be sexually abused in private schools just like they are in public schools. Mm-hmm. And making sure you create an environment of communication where your kid would communicate in any moment that they were ever in any one of those situations. But you bringing up the school thing is so unbelievably important because people will look at a guy like you and be like, oh yeah, well, you have a business and you have the time and you have a wife that's willing to do that and blah, blah, blah. And they're just making all these freaking excuses. And they're going to be the number one type of person that complains someday when their kid goes off to college and furthers the indoctrination that they've been marinating in for all these years. And they're going to be like, what happened? Like, where did my sweet daughter go? Like, she's got a nose ring and purple hair now. And she's saying these crazy things that our family doesn't abide by. It's like, that's kind of on you, Mom. Like, that's kind of on you, Dad. And so for the dads out there, I mean, you said it right. You put your foot down and just say, like, look, this is a hill I'm willing to die on. And if it's not your kid's education, what hill are you talking about?
Yeah, I think the excuse, it's like preparedness. Like, if you pick up what I'm laying down, I'm glad because you're listening. But if you're not, to each their own. Do you, man? Because at the end of the day, I'm concerned about me, my family, and the people I surround myself with.
Right.
And the same thing with school. Like, I get it, but I think most of those things are excuses. Especially like the idea of homeschooling when I was growing up was you had a weird situation and somebody was keeping their kids at home and that kid was not getting socialized and being taught by a parent who probably shouldn't be teaching. I'm not saying I want to teach my own kids. I am going to have a group of families that I know because I looked the dad in the eye and I shook his hand firmly, which telegraphed, I will kill you if you do anything to my daughter or to my son. And then they will be taught by a teacher that we pull into, and that's the idea for me. It's like a community of homeschooling families who get it and who want to have a more intimate relationship with teachers and the education, and they want to be involved. And I think that's when you look at the rat race, like I see the error in social media is it was supposed to make us more socially connected and make everything more efficient. It's actually done the complete opposite because we've reallocated the time and efficiency back into social media. So it's like you pull that time and you're like, man, I can get this done so much faster. And then you just dump more of that time into your phone instead of your kids.
Well, and you said it whenever you brought up community. Social media was supposed to connect us in a way that was never thought possible. So when your best friend moves to Florida and, you still live in Oklahoma and you can stay connected with that person, you don't have to write letters and send postcards, like you can just stay connected. And to a degree, you're right. The number of benefits people have gotten from social media is not zero. It's not like a complete negative. It's potentially a net negative, but we have completely devalued community. It goes back to that book, I think it's from the 90s, Bowling Alone, to where it just showed that we've lost the thread of why community is important. So the church is no different. You have these people that go out and just say, I don't need to go to the church. I'm going to just do me. Even though if you believe that the Bible is truly the word of God, it says that you need to be part of an ecclesia, which is a local group of believers that is reading the word, expositing the word, and singing, psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs together and those types of things. But even in a non-Christian context, how many families live in the suburbs? They drive their expensive fancy car into their expensive driveway on their very expensive house in their well-manicured lawn, and they drive in and they wave at the neighbor and say, hey, good to see you. Oh, hey, you doing good? That type of thing. And then they walk inside and they're just as depraved as somebody that doesn't have those things. They're just as alcoholic. They're just as judgmental. They're just as angry. They're just as sexually, ridiculous. All those things are still the same, but also here's the big thing. And you hit on this perfectly on the preparedness side. if something goes wrong and you don't even know your neighbors, this isn't about going and borrowing a cup of sugar. It's, can you depend on the neighbor to your left and right that when you go out on a supply run, that they're going to watch your family for you and not go and take your stuff? Like, that seems like a simple thing, and maybe it seems kind of crazy, but you've dealt with this, like the preparedness thing, like, oh, are you crazy and paranoid and all that's like, prepared is not paranoia. But we don't have that at all. And bringing it back to men, how many men have a guy they can call at 3 a.m.? And so I talk about foxhole guys kind of in my context, but I talk about the difference between a 6 p.m. friend and a 3 a.m. friend. So there are guys that you can call or text until about 6 p.m. And if you need to, help moving something or you need some advice, like they're available until about 6. And after that, oh, I'm just too busy. Then there's the guys that at 3 a.m., you're calling them. Not only do you know that they're going to answer, but you're going to hear in the background them getting on their pants, clicking their, pistol in the appendix position and grabbing a shovel, because they assume that we're burying a body, right? That's just what they assume, and they're down to help you. Most men have zero of these guys. And so when you see this epidemic of suicide, when you see this epidemic of fatherlessness, you see this epidemic of just men not helping sharpen the iron of other men, it's a detriment to all of society. Because guess what? If you and I lived here, you and I would kind of be foxhole brothers. Like if we lived in Utah together, and I would fully expect for you, Mike, that if you saw me, we're out to dinner with our wives, and if I made a sarcastic, mean, biting comment to my wife, and she just kind of grinned and went with it, I would fully expect for you in the parking lot to grab me by the scruff of my shirt and be like, bro, I know you were being funny. I know you're trying to be funny, but you hurt your wife, and that's not acceptable, and you're not going to do that. And I'm not going to fight you, and we're not going to have like a falling out. I'm just going to be like, brother, you're right. I'm so sorry. I would apologize to you and your wife, and I would apologize to my wife in front of everybody, and then we'd move on. Most men don't have that check. They don't have that person that is looking out for them, because they're going to be like, hey man, I know you're going for that quarterly sales bonus. Do you realize you've been gone 4 out of the last 5 weekends, and those weekends have been 3 or 4 days long? You're completely disconnected from your family, and you need to stop it. But most guys just don't have that. And it just goes back to most of the cultural ills we find from having that lack of community. Yeah,
it's a loss of tribe, and there's nothing worse than a dude being disaffected or not even discovering his own tribe.
Yep.
It's weird, as I grew up in the 80s, and my family growing up then, maybe it was because it was generationally, was very closely connected.
Yeah.
And then technology came into the picture, and my grandmother died, and it kind of disaffected and separated most of us geographically, but there was no plans to get back together. And so I grew up in that, thankfully, and now I'm creating it on my own with my kids and my friends and people that I care about. But how do you get started with something like that? Like, how do you, like, you're out there flapping. I mean, there's more single people now than there's ever been. They could just easily swipe left instead of swiping right. How do you create that community?
So I will get emails and DMs all the time from guys that are like, it used to be like, hey, is there a man-friendly church in my area? Because I don't care about men's ministry, right? Because men's ministry is typically just women's ministry content repackaged for men. So they put like metal or dirt or wood on the logo, and then that's basically
rustic.
Yeah, they it's rustic, but then it's, hey, here's a group of strangers. Let's put y'all in a circle together and have y'all chat about your feelings. When they don't realize that women connect eyeball to eyeball and men connect shoulder to shoulder before they connect eyeball to eyeball. And so you're just forcing these guys into an eyeball to eyeball situation that they're not, wired for. But overall, what I would tell to that person who's maybe that single guy in their 20s that wants to level up as a man, that wants to be a man worth marrying and wants to be a man worthy of fatherhood and all that, it's like, you have this tremendous opportunity right now where you are single and no one's depending upon you. When is a better time, and when will you have more time to sharpen the sword than right now? And so that's why I talk about spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. Because here's the thing that I know. I got guys in my life that are prayer warriors, but if they need to sprint from here to the parking lot, they're not going to make it, right? They're not physically resilient, spiritually, but not mentally, or spiritually, but not physically. But then you also got the guys that are like gym bros, right? They're going to deadlift and squat, and they're the best guy in the gym, and they can do more pull-ups. They haven't read a book since high school. So it's like, hey man, like, there are the places that you're naturally drawn to, but then there's the things that you need to do in order to level up. And so out here in HQ, you've got a bunch of books out there. You've got The Man in the Arena by Eddie Gallagher. You've got Hillenbrand's book, Unbroken. You've got stuff from Chad Robichaux. Those are books where you're reading stories of resilience and you're learning how that could be applicable to you. We have a book list on our website, the 100 books every modern Christian man should read list. They don't all come from a Christian worldview. We have the 48 Laws of Power on there. We have Machiavelli's Prince. We've got different books that are on there, and it's just like, just start reading books off this list and see if you don't get these nuggets that apply directly to you, so that when you meet that woman, she's not seeing a baby in you. She's not seeing a adult that can shave, that's still a child. She's seeing somebody that she can imagine building a life with and building a family with, as opposed to her having to be like, okay, well, he's kind of cute, but he's going to be a project. So let me see how this goes. You want to talk about divorce waiting to happen, but you show yourself as a capable man, and you have to be spiritually, mentally, and physically resilient. Go to church, find a band of brothers, find people that you can actually study the word with, like, and grow in that way. Mentally, what are you doing to challenge yourself? Are you doing the same old things? Are you doom scrolling on Instagram or watching Netflix or doing these things that require nothing of you? Or are you challenging yourself by reading a difficult book? Are you pulling out Prepared and then you've got your highlighter and your notes and you're trying to be like, okay, here's something that I can't really do right now because I live in an apartment, so I can't have chickens. But you know what I can do? I can do this, 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 and this. Are you doing that? And then physically, it's like, that's the easiest one to see, because I can look with my eyes and see whether you're a physically resilient person or not, whether you are robust in your physicality. And again, if you're a single dude, like, or if you just don't have kids, even if you're married, best time in the world to develop that. Yeah, none at all.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's really sound advice. I mean, I grew up that way in the military, and when I was single, I had a paperback book in my cargo pocket everywhere I went, and I was reading, I was working out, and I was getting the hard skills, through training.
Yep.
Going to Ranger School, going to all these high-speed schools. And then academically, I was getting my bachelor's degree, which took me 15 years in the background. So it's like most men piss away that time.
Yep.
And then, like you said, they arrive and they say they're not ready because they know they're not ready, and then it ends in divorce because they're immature, or they're not ready to settle down. And I always found it bizarre, maybe give me some insight, this idea that you have to be single, and even turning away a really good girl that potentially you can grow a family with, because you have to get it out of your system. I never understood that. And I wasn't raised that way. I was very monogamous growing up, and I believe in commitment. My first couple girlfriends in high school cheated on me, and it was very easy for me to cut sling load on them. But then I realized, like, I don't want my focus to be relationships or a woman. And so I focused on my hard skills, focused on reading, focused on being better. And then, I haven't had perfect relationships, but I know it's, for single people out there, it's a difficult path and a difficult road, but it's a desired path, because once you're squared away with foundationally somebody that you love and respect, you can grow as a family unit together and crush the world.
If you're sowing your wild oats, that means that you have bought the cultural lie that that's what you're supposed to do. That, hey, I'm only going to be 25 once, I'm single, let's go club and let's go do this. And not only are you spending a bunch of money that you shouldn't be spending, you are becoming the type of person that the person you want to be with wouldn't want to be with.
Yeah.
And you're doing it to yourself. It's not their fault, it's your fault, because you suck and you're choosing to suck.
Yeah.
And so the reality is, I got married when I was 22, right? And so people are like, you're crazy. Like, I used to work in New York City, and I'd been married for a few years already in my mid-20s. And then people looked at me like I had a boob on the top of my head. They're like, this is weird. Like, why did you get married? I was like, well, this is the woman I want to be with for the rest of my life. I met her on my 19th birthday, and she was 18. We dated all through college. What was I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Hey, boo, I love you so much, but I'm going to spend the next 8 years doing me. I'm going to go discover myself on some sort of backpacking trip in Europe and all that. I'm going to sow my wild oats, and I'm going to go to the red light district, and I'm just going to see who I am, just to end up back with you. Like, think about the logic of that. It doesn't even make sense.
No.
And so, but then there's also cultural wisdom, which is almost never moral. Cultural wisdom says, hey man, you got to drive the truck before you buy it. So just live together. Just pretend marry without the commitment. But what you do when you're living with a chick is you're practicing divorce. And people are like, well, what are you talking about? Because when you talk to people that have lived with a woman before they got married, a lot of times they've lived with multiple women before they actually got married. And so when you're living with a woman and you break up, what are you doing? Figuring out who gets the dog, figuring out who's going to get the deposit back for the bills. Oh crap, I left my favorite toothbrush there. Do you still have it? Oh, you got my CDs, you got all my DVDs. Whose Netflix account? Like, are we splitting the account, or am I going to give you my login? And it's like you're practicing divorce. And people are like, oh, it's not that serious. No, it's more serious than I could even explain. And then you get into a marriage relationship and all of a sudden you're supposed to just flip the switch and be monogamous. You're just supposed to only get your sexual gratification from your spouse when you spent years on sexual conquest. And when you talk to these people, Mike, and they get to the one, whatever that means, even though that's a stupid concept anyway, because like if anyone in history ever married the wrong person, then the one basically is not a thing, but that's a side note. But then you get to this point where you have that girl, that's the one. And without even trying, you're going to compare her and her performance sexually to all these other girls that you've been with. And guess what? She knows that too, because she's thinking about the same thing. And you're having to think like, gosh, am I better than these guys? Am I bigger than these guys? Like, well, what's the deal? And you have all this anxiety. But you know, for me, I've had one sexual partner in my entire life, and that's the woman I married. So I don't have to worry about that. And people are like, oh, that's crazy. That's backward. It's like, is it? I know people that had their first kiss on the altar. And you know what they don't do at all? Regret. They don't wish they had kissed all those boys in high school, and they don't wish that they had slept with all those girls in college. Like they don't regret it. They're like, I had this gift of my body and myself. And if you believe scripture and you come from a Christian worldview, when you have sex with somebody, you create a tie to that person and you're giving yourself to them and you're creating one flesh in that moment through the sanctity of marriage and through the act of sex. And when you've given that to so many people, like you're handing out, freebies at a concert or something like that, it's like, why do you expect him to value you when you've cheapened yourself? And that goes the same with girls and guys. And so again, it's like, look at these celebrities and stars that get into their 50s and 60s. They're not selling records anymore. They're not, popular anymore and all that. And they've done all the coke. They've screwed all the chicks. They've done all the things you can do. And they all say the same thing. Man, it was so empty. I couldn't, I won the Super Bowl and I went back to my hotel room and I thought, is this all there is? Like I've reached the top, and is this all there is? And it's like, again, when you listen to the whispers of culture and understand that who's in charge of culture, it's not God, it's Satan. It's like, where do you expect? You're going to go towards your downfall and you're not even going to realize it.
Jeez. I need to take that. I should have took that advice 20 years ago.
Yeah, you can't do it. You can't do it back then. You can only do it moving forward. So.
Well, the benefit of that in your perspective is, a critic would say, oh, you're so high and mighty while they're doing that. Like literally they're doing that. It's like you have a choice to stop, because I think gluttonous human beings think, wow, I'm already doing it anyway. I'm a scumbag anyway.
But the high and mighty thing, that is a self-protection mechanism for them to feel better for not having a standard. And so like when you get on somebody for having a standard, it's the same thing when somebody is fat and all their friends are fat and then they decide to not be fat anymore. All their fat friends are like, hey, come be fat with us again. Why? Because you're making me feel bad because I want to stay lazy and awful and you're trying to level up. It's the same exact concept.
Yeah, I think that there's something really critical about understanding standards and establishing standards. Like standard operating procedures in the military are there because they create a baseline of uniformity, but also quality.
Right.
And so if you don't have standards for yourself because you just don't care, or you make excuses, or you're insecure, then you're just going to be an amoeba, like, manipulating through life and just not doing anything successful. Like a lot of American men, especially that suffer from obesity, which is the overwhelming majority of the country, 60, 70%, depending on the stats, have no standards, zero standards. If you had to establish a couple standards for men to live by, what would those standards be?
So the thing about standards and why people don't create them is because they think it's impossible to do. Or they see someone else's standard, they think, well, I can't achieve that, so I'm going to have no standards. So recently I heard, on a podcast or something, so who the heck knows if it's true, they said, okay, if you can bench press your body weight, if you can back squat 1.5 times your body weight, deadlift twice your body weight, and run a mile in under 7 minutes, you're in elite level shape. So I was like, is that true? Okay, let's figure that out. So one morning, a few months back, I was like, all right, I'm going to just do all of them back to back. And so I weigh about 200 pounds. And so it was, 200 pound, bench press, no big deal. 300 pound squat, no big deal. 300 pound deadlift, 400 pound deadlift, no big deal. And then I ran the mile in like 5:59 or something like that. So I wasn't exactly smoking it, but for 37, I was like, I'll take it. But people will say, well, I can't possibly attain that. So I'm just going to have no standard. So your standard is going to be different than my standard when it comes to physicality, because I basically haven't taken more than a week off from working out since I was 15 years old, right? Unless I was injured. So your standard might be, I am going to work out 4 times a week. That is my standard. Except for sickness or injury or something like that, I'm going to work out and get after it. Even if you're traveling. So that may just be 100 burpees in your hotel room before you go out and do whatever business that you need to do. Maybe that's your standard. And maybe that you're a lazy, sack of bones. And so one of those classes have to be a class that someone else controls. So maybe you're at CrossFit or Orange Theory or something like that, and you're doing a class where someone else is telling you what to do as opposed to you doing it yourself. Maybe that's your standard. So let's talk about mental. You haven't read a book since high school. Here's the easiest standard I can possibly tell someone to do with reading. So whatever book you're reading now, you're reading Prepared. Great. You need to know the next 2 books you're going to read right now. And so you're going to read Saving Aziz by Chad Robichaux, and then you're going to read Tim Kennedy's memoir after that. So you have something to look forward to. And if you find something in the meantime that's like, oh, that's a really interesting book. Like I want to read Eddie Penny's book about his life and how he's unafraid and all those different things. Maybe you interject that. And then you tell yourself, after I finish Prepared, I have 1 week maximum break. And that's your standard. So you're reading Prepared, however long it takes you to read it. Maybe you have standards, you read 10 pages a day, whatever, but you know what's in, your future, and you don't give yourself more than a week off, because you know how it goes. You stop reading for a week and that turns into 2 weeks and that turns into 6 months. And then you're just not a reader all of a sudden. And so those are the standards by which I tell people like how you should develop. And a guy last night at jiu-jitsu, because I rolled here last night, dude found out I was a Christian, a white belt. And he was just like asking me these questions. He's like, hey man, I feel like the Holy Spirit's communicated to me my whole life. And it's kind of more than a conscience. It's kind of more than a gut feeling. I feel like the Holy Spirit's been guiding me. But over the last few months, I haven't heard it at all. Like, what's wrong? And I was like, I met this guy 17 seconds ago. And so it's like, how the heck am I going to prescribe his problem? But I was like, it sounds like maybe you've fallen off the wagon with some of your disciplines that allowed you to hear those voices, or that voice, not voices, that voice. Have you gotten busier lately? Are you doom scrolling more than you were before? Are you watching more Netflix? Have you created less margin in your mental capacity for just sitting and existing? And his eyes just got real big. And I'm like, maybe that's God's way of saying, I've been talking this whole time, you just can't hear me. And it's like, I'll turn my volume up if I need to, but I think you need to turn your volume down. So you kind of see what I'm saying. So for him, the standard might be, 15 minutes in the morning of just staring at the mountains and just sitting and listening. And maybe you get something that day and maybe you don't. But yeah, these standards, it's super contextual to you and you have no excuse not to have them.
Yeah, it's super interesting because it does have to do with discipline and formulating a plan. I mean, you can't have standards if you don't set out goals.
You got it.
And if you don't strive to succeed in those goals, and then keep track and accountability of yourself. And it's so basic. It's so easy. It's like Jocko's. We did it in the military together, but it's like Jocko's pack a bag prior to the next morning. I used to do that all the time. Like pack a bag with your gym stuff, so there's no excuse. You're getting rid of all the excuses. And this phone has given us many excuses to get off the bandwagon. And it's sad. It's depriving because it's all in the means of making more net profit, taking away your attention, that you are definitely not investing in yourself, which is obviously hurting your standard. I mean, you can't maintain a standard if you're hurting it. Well,
you're allowing external forces to dictate what you do. So I've got this Garmin watch. Good buddy Matt gave it to me as a gift before a trip, and it's great. It can do all kinds of fancy things. I turned all the notifications off though, because I don't need boop, boop in my pocket and boop, boop on my wrist. I don't need that type of thing. But when I look at the app in the morning, the Garmin app, and then I look at my body battery and how recharged I am, when I look at the the sleep score and I look at all these things, and it has a little thing right there that says, you're under recovered. Your heart rate variability was all over the place while you were sleeping. You should probably take it easy today. It's like, that's cute. All right. And then I go and work out. And some people will be like, you're not listening to your body. It's like, sometimes you have to tell your body, shut up. Like, I have to go do this. And I remember Dustin Poirier saying that on the Joe Rogan Experience back in the day. Like, hey, do you wear a whoop strap? Do you do all this stuff? And he was just kind of like, yeah, but I'm not going to let my watch tell me whether or not I'm going to work out today. Now, if you truly feel like, hey, if I work today, I'm probably going to, it's going to have more deleterious effects than it's going to have positives, you get to make that determination. An app doesn't get to do that. Because this same fancy watch that I've been wearing, I'll be like redlining on the Airdyne bike and it says my heart rate's like 76. And it's like, no, I'm in the 140s, 150s right now. And so it's like, this can't always get the temperature right outside. It can't always get my elevation right, but I'm going to let the app dictate what I do today, and whether or not I get after it, no thanks.
It's like the Google Maps app telling you to go through a wall.
Right.
Well, it said go straight.
Yeah.
Like, well, you
wait, I have to exit to get right back on the highway? Okay, cool. Yeah, let's do that.
That's so funny. Let's transition. We're going to transition into some prepared speak. I'm going to do this for the Philcraft app because I'm very interested in your perspective on your own preparedness and kind of your lifestyle in it. And I know you definitely subscribe to the idea of self-reliance and being prepared. Unfortunately, it won't be on the Mike Force podcast. You got to go to the app for that. That's how this works, guys. We provide the value, you convert, and you go, hey, man, they're providing value for me, so let's provide value for them. Before we leave, though, amazing conversation on this topic and this subject matter. You get a lot of insight and different perspective than I've ever heard before, which is really amazing. How can people listen and tune into the things that you're talking about?
Yeah, so Undaunted.Life, that's our website. And I mean, our podcast, we started back in 2017. And so over 500 episodes now. It's everywhere you get, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. The thing is we cover faith, culture, and politics, not necessarily in that order and not, a third. It just depends on what we're doing. I have interviews like guys like you will come on the show, but I'll have you one week and then a pastor the next week and then Yeonmi Park after that. And then Timmy will come back on. And, it's just kind of those types of things. But then I do solo episodes where I cover particular subjects that are important to me, cover things that are in the news. And to a degree, some people look at me as a pastor and it's like, no, I'm the prophet. I don't mean like prophesying, telling the future. It's like John the Baptist was actually speaking truth into power. I hate that phraseology because of what it's turned into, but he was actually speaking truth to power. And I'm not going to have to give an account to God someday for how I shepherded you because you're not my flock. But I have to give an account for how I've, told people to go and the things I've said to them. So if the stuff you heard today is stuff that you kind of like and you want a little bit more of that, Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast, is where you get that. And we're working on some things right now, moving into 2024, that will kind of expand this whole idea of equipping men to push back darkness, spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. How can you practically do that on a day in, day out basis? So follow along with that. And I will kind of shameless plug, we're basically completely donor supported. And I mean like $10 a month donors, $20 a month donors. Like, we don't have big backing. We don't make a ton of money off of ads. I was telling you, your boy over here, like, YouTube hates us. The algorithm hates us because we say crazy things like women can't become men and, you shouldn't kill babies when they're in the womb, crazy stuff like that. And so the only way we're able to get this content in people's ears is because we have guys that love what we do, that want to equip themselves and want to equip other men around the globe to push back darkness, that are donating to us. And so those are the big ways.
Is that like a donor link or a subscription? Or
we have a donor link on our website. It's a donor box. And so it's like you can do a one-time or you can do a hop in on a monthly basis type of thing. We're working on rolling out some things that are going to be maybe not app-based, but like more subscription-based. So it's like, hey, if you're really serious about this, because you know the drill, you can listen to the podcast for free, or you can become an insider and you could really start to level up and get a little bit more attention. So we're in the process of working some of that stuff out. But yeah, Undaunted.Life, that's where you get access to the podcast, our devotionals, like all kinds of random stuff, the book list, and then the podcast, just wherever you like to listen.
Awesome. We'll provide all those links down below. Kyle, appreciate you, man.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, brother.